Hello, and welcome to the 10th episode of our Strasz Assessment Systems podcast, Beyond the Test Strasz Talks. I really appreciate all of you for spending some time today with me and my guest, which I'd like to introduce. I'm very pleased to have with me today Francisco Gomez. He is the CEO of Factum Global. And we'll dive into in just a minute, what Factum Global is all about. So, Francisco, welcome.
Thanks, Rory. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, Francisco, if you would briefly introduce yourself and tell us what is Factum Global?
Of course, as you said, I'm the CEO and founder of Factum Global, which is an international consulting firm that helps companies and associations expand into international markets. We help organizations from understanding the readiness to developing their strategy, all the way to conducting operations in the ground around the world. We focus mostly in the Latin America, Asia Pacific, and Middle Eastern corridors, in addition to the United States, of course. But truly, we can help people and companies, and we have helped people and companies around the world. We're headquartered in Washington, D.C., but we have our team. So we're in different parts of the U.S. and around the world in places like Dubai and Madrid, Thailand, Colombia, from where we have the ability to help our clients on the ground in a much better way.
That's awesome, and quite the footprint for especially a consultancy in the association space of all things. And we'll come back to that a little more in a bit, because I do want to ask you about the evolution and some of the work that you've done with your clients. I typically ask folks when they get on my podcast how they got into the testing and assessment space. But since you are more in, let's say, the association space writ large, tell me that story. How did you end up in association world, and what was your career journey there?
It's actually very interesting because I didn't even know the association industry was an industry. I began my career in healthcare management, where I learned a lot about sort of managing complex operations and that type of thing. And then I transitioned into consulting, where I got exposure to a lot of industries, international markets. And then eventually I landed at the American Chemical Society, which, as you probably know, is an association, one of the largest associations in the world. And I ended up spending about 10 years there, where I was responsible for global strategy and new market development. But when I first joined ACS, it was because I met a person who was working there. And when I was a consultant, she said to me, "Look, we're looking for someone to help us with the international aspect of what we do. It sounds like you could be a right candidate for this. Would you be interested?" So one thing led to the next. And before you know it, I'm working for an association and discovering this whole world of an industry that most people don't know, but moves around 5% of the US GDP. So that's sort of how I ended up there. Like I was telling you, I was responsible for helping this organization grow. And that experience led me to the founding of Factum Global, where, as I explained, we help associations and companies around the world expand into international markets. So I saw an opportunity to help a lot of these associations. I had a lot of colleagues that were in different organizations that were facing similar challenges to the ones I was facing. You're trying to enter into different markets, China, India at the time, Brazil, other parts of the world, and you're doing everything almost at once. And no matter how large or how small your organization is, you need help, and you need to understand how things are different in different places you're going in, and you need that support. And we didn't find a place where we could really have a partner to help us through that. So we ended up with a number of different organizations that were hired by us to help us in that journey, everywhere from all the way to the Big Four to very local organizations in areas such as marketing or taxes, et cetera, and 5 to 7 contracts in every market that you were going into. So I thought there's got to be a better way. and that led us to Factum Global, where we're trying to bring all of that under one roof.
Hmm. I think that's especially powerful, and I mean something that's been talked about a great deal in the assessment space. And when we were introduced by my former boss, actually, at one of the associations I worked for, I have to say it really resonated with me, everything that you all do, because I mean, I literally cannot tell you the number of times during my career that a credentialing or an assessment organization has come up to me and told me that they want to go global. And I know you've gotten that line before. I'm curious, as you have had clients kind of bring you that ask at conferences or meetings, how do you respond? What are some of those initial considerations that you tell them to think about first?
Yeah, you're right. I hear that a lot. And typically I don't understand exactly what they mean. So my first question is why, right? What are you trying to accomplish? What do you mean when you say we want to go global? Because obviously I urge my clients to think about the goals and what success looks like for them, because it's not the same thing to go global for one organization than it is for another, right? What are you trying to accomplish? Why are you doing this? What leads you to believe that you should be going global, right? So going global should be a strategic decision that is based on demand, organizational readiness, and obviously understanding the markets that you want to go to. So it's not just about you exporting your services or your products or your programs, in the case of associations, into another country, but it's also adapting to that new cultural, legal, and operational context that you're trying to get into. So when you ask me about considerations, some of those considerations would include understanding that regulatory landscape, thinking about what is your marketing strategy, how are you going to allocate resources, and then obviously thinking about how are you going to have boots on the ground. And it's not necessarily hire stuff, but are you going to have partnerships or alliances on the ground? How are you going to ensure that you understand that market and you have people on the ground that are helping you execute on the things that you're trying to do, right? So thinking about all those fundamental steps can make or break a global expansion. And I try to get it right from the very beginning, right? And it all comes down to objectives. If you don't know what you're trying to achieve, then going global is just a vision that is just sort of a desire, but without a plan, that's all it is.
Well, and I know in a number of those cases, Francisco, I think you and I both had the experience. They'll come back with that end purpose, which typically is revenue growth. But as to the whys, wherefores, and how they're going to adapt the organization to do so, usually those areas are where they're a little light on specifics and goals as well.
Rory, it is interesting to talk about revenue because, yes, as you probably know, we also talk a lot about membership when we're talking about associations. And it's interesting that many associations don't really get that talking about mission, talking about membership doesn't have to exclude you from talking about revenue. And that's one of the things that we do with organizations is help them understand how do you go global and what are you trying to achieve, but what are the channels to get there, right?
I completely agree. And that's often, a set of resources that particularly associations, usually don't have in-house to be able to do that critical thinking. That said, let's put a framework to all this, because you and I had a great experience back in September when we were attending the Washington International Association Forum. And first off, many thanks for putting that on my radar. It was a real pleasure to be there. You went over a framework for associations to consider, as they might consider moving outside their typical geographic boundaries. And would love for you to share more about that model here and where you've seen associations commonly make those evolutionary steps as they go into this journey.
Yeah, of course. I'm glad you remember the framework. At least someone was listening. I believe the one I shared at the conference is one that I think about often because it's easy to understand, and particularly for associations is very relevant, is the Bartlett and Gottschalk model, which is a great framework for organizations looking to expand internationally. because it helps organizations understand the balance between global integration and local responsiveness. When you think about associations, what they need to figure out the most is whether they want to centralize operations and governance, or if they're going to be thinking about allowing for more local autonomy in international markets. And every association is different. Some organizations really want to empower those people on the ground to make decisions, to localize the offerings, because in their industry that may make more sense. For other associations, it's about how to think about more globally, and they like to keep the control at headquarters, right? And they have a lot of emphasis on quality control, and they want to make sure that whatever they're doing is consistent. So the model also emphasizes the importance of developing capabilities that allow you to do that, right? So that you're both globally efficient but locally adaptable. And I think that is key when you're trying to go global, is that if you want to succeed, you have to have that really good combination and understand just how far do you want to go in playing with those two variables. So in practice, I've seen associations evolve through this approach by starting very small scale. Different from companies, associations tend to be, and I don't want to generalize, but tend to be a little bit more risk averse. And so what you see is that they start with small scale, perhaps they try one market, and when they learn from those markets, and they start getting into other markets and applying what they're learning as they go farther, right? So those localized efforts that align with their sort of broader goals and objectives are very important before scaling up to a full international operation. You see those sort of baby steps that they're taking to get there, and this model really helps for them to think through it and what does it mean internally in terms of allocation of resources, people, processes that need to be in place, et cetera.
Now, completely hear that, and I will say it was the framework that as you were going over that and speaking with an association executive, I think tracing some common, let's say, experiences. The example of IKEA sticks with me that you provided. As a way to really interpret where one's organization is at. Now, I will just ask, one of the things that I think a lot of, in particular, credentialing bodies, whether they're within associations or in a for-profit entity, a lot of them do have that balancing act to make in that, a number of the offerings, the quality, when you're talking about, say, a certification exam, does have to be centralized, right? The production of that, the quality control. But certainly that doesn't, rule out partnerships on the ground for preparation materials, for marketing and communications, for advocacy. And I know you've also worked with organizations that, have to blend some of those activities. I guess I'm just curious to hear, from your experience, how is that kind of, let's say, wrestling act, if you will, how is that done well, within associations? And of course, thinking here particularly about groups that are doing testing, but I'm curious based upon your experiences there.
Yeah, of course. It is a balancing act. And like I said, it's different for every organization. Every association has a very different context and environment that they have to play in, and industries are very different. And you and I have worked together in a couple of things where we've seen that. But I think the important thing is for people to do their research, understand and understand their readiness, understand their capabilities, understand what they're trying to accomplish, so that they can tweak their approach to meet those needs. And you probably you've worked with a lot of associations. You know that some of them are better suited partnering with international counterparts in order to deliver some of the programs and services that they're developing. In the credentialing world, that is also true. Many times with universities, many times with sort of what we call sister organizations, right? Mm-hmm. But sometimes it may be better off to just be on your own, because perhaps what people are looking for instance, with organizations that are based in the US, is that US credential. So that doesn't mean that you may not have products or offerings that are within your home market. In this case, we're talking about the US, that perhaps other people around the world may have an appetite for. And if that is the case, you need to understand that, because you need very little localization, and you don't have to be worrying about the other things as much as other associations do. But I would say that the majority of organizations do have to worry about this, and they have to think about, how is my content relevant? What are the things that are different in different parts of the world that perhaps are not going to apply well? And how are we going to create solutions that are flexible to meet those cultural differences, to meet those context differences, so that they're going to be well received in the places where we're trying to go. So, everyone's always, or not everyone, but a lot of people always come to me and say, I saw what X organization did, I want to do the same thing. And I'm like, wait, hold on a second. How do you know that that's going to work for you, right? Well, it's another association. They're clearly successful, yes, but their context, their industry, and what they're trying to accomplish may be completely different from what you're trying to do. It's an individual, organization by organization decision, and I hope that more and more executives understand that, because cookie cutter solutions are just not going to cut it, right?
I love that point, Francisco, and I can speak firsthand, especially in the association testing space. I mean, the number of folks when I was back working at the Project Management Institute who, would come up to me at conferences and ask for our secret sauce type of thing, to try to, really imitate that, if you will. Yes, found very much a lot of the same from my experience. So I so appreciate you pointing that out. Due diligence is critical. So turning to perhaps, unfortunately, the negative side of this, obviously a lot of associations have tried to make international or global transformations. And certainly the batting average, since we're in the midst of the baseball playoffs here, on these initiatives is not altogether ideal. So what are some of the most common reasons, that you have seen why these global transformations fail, and how do you often work with your clients to plan, not to fall into some of those common traps?
Well, there are several reasons, as you know, and I think one of the key mistakes is not conducting a thorough readiness assessment, right? How do you know if you're ready, your people are ready, if you have the capabilities? Many organizations jump into international markets without fully evaluating if their internal operations, their resources, and the leadership, which is very important, are prepared for such a move. So that can lead to poor execution, inability to sustain operations abroad, and overall just failure, right? Another major issue that I often think about is underestimating cultural differences. It's so easy to think that you know another place because you've traveled there once or twice, or because you know someone from there, et cetera, or because you've read a book. And you cannot simply replicate your domestic strategies in your markets without understanding local preferences very, very well, right? You need to understand regulations. You need to understand business practices. So that's an area that we see often, is that there are a lot of assumptions and cutting corners in terms of understanding what it means to be in a different place. Another big one is poor governance or a lack of leadership buy-in, which is a critical factor, obviously. If you don't have the leadership on board, it's just not going to work. And if your governance structure, if your governance processes, or your governance culture is not aligned with the goals of the organization, without a clear decision-making process for international operations, initiatives often fail. And one last one that I think about often also is that organizations many times don't invest in local talent or partnerships. And I was talking about this earlier. What are those boots on the ground, right? Success truly requires having local experts who understand the market and can drive that growth. And to avoid some of those pitfalls, organizations need to truly conduct that readiness assessment that I'm telling you, and identify what are the skill sets or the areas in which we need support, and ensure that they have the right local resources or partners in place in order to be successful. think those are some of the main reasons. There are many more, but these are some critical aspects that I see quite often in organizations, even with mid to large size organizations that are quite sophisticated, still make some of the same mistakes.
I appreciate that, Francisco, and I think there's a lot of wisdom there in that response, just on some of those key aspects that people can research, think about, and ensure that their organization is aligned. Because I know a number of your transformation projects have indeed turned into a number of different things because of some of those aspects not being aligned within an organization. And I think it's just a testament to some of the great work that you do there.
And for us, those are the best clients, right? Where we go in and we do an assessment and we help them understand where they need to go, and they ask questions, and they know what they know, and they know what they don't know. And as we work together as partners and we identify areas of opportunities or challenges, that willingness to work through that and that adaptability is key with the clients that we have seen succeed, right? And those are our best clients because we continue working with them for years. And we see their progress, and we see them growing, and we see them succeeding. And that's the difference between them and those organizations that perhaps we don't see make the same strides into their international journey, is that they're truly committed, they're adaptable, and they understand what they don't know and the help that they need in order to get there.
Oh, I love that. And you couldn't have queued my next question up any better, which is, tell me more about those success stories. Just in terms about not necessarily identifying organizations, of course, per se, but what are some of those success stories that you can point to that have you really see as setting the bar for making these kinds of initiatives successful?
Yeah, we have a few that stand out, that we've seen truly be successful, but in the context of associations, which is so relevant to what we're discussing right now, one stands out, and it was an association that had primarily a U.S. focus, but wanted to expand into Latin America and Europe. We helped them to conduct an in-depth market research to understand where their services would be most in demand and how to adapt to those local cultural and regulatory requirements that I was mentioning earlier. We did an international readiness assessment to help them understand internally where they were in terms of capabilities across things like people and culture and systems and finances, so that they could pay attention to the areas that require most attention and could leverage those areas where they were stronger. We facilitated partnerships with local associations, which allowed them to quickly build trust and credibility in the markets that they were trying to get into. And over time, their membership base grew significantly, and they became a global leader in their field. Those success stories make my day. This is why we work. This is why we're in business. And it truly was due to their willingness to adapt and invest in understanding each market that they enter, right? They took their time. They figured out what they wanted to do. They had a plan, and then they executed. And they understood it was going to take time, that it was going to take resources and investment, and they didn't expect to see a return on that investment immediately. They understood that it was going to take time, and now they're really seeing sort of the fruit of that from having a clear strategy and having that flexibility. Another example that everybody would know about, of course, I don't need to talk just only about clients, it would be Starbucks, right? So while Starbucks has seen some massive success, it hasn't always been smooth sailing. They've had failures in markets like Australia, where they truly misjudged the sort of the coffee culture there, and they had some failures, but they learned from those mistakes, right? And by learning from these setbacks, Starbucks was able to truly apply a more localized approach in other markets. Take China, where they adapted their offerings and their store designs, and they remain very strong in terms of a global success story. So their ability to combine that global brand consistency with local adaptation that we've been talking about all along is a valuable lesson for any organization that is looking to expand internationally. And then also that aspect of learning from those failures, right? There's no perfect story out there of an organization that just did it perfectly and never made a mistake, but they truly learn from those mistakes, and they have continued to adapt and understand from those mistakes to not do it again in a different market. Those are a couple examples, one a client, one a non-client, that sort of everybody can think about, but you can see the similarities in the adaptability and understanding of local culture, et cetera.
I completely agree there. And one of the things that you mentioned that I really appreciate, in addition to the discussion about a comprehensive readiness assessment, is also that understanding and strategic decision around where you're going to really look to expand globally. Interestingly enough, I was on a webinar this morning with the Association of Test Publishers, specifically talking about doing business in Asia. And that was one of the first points, was Asia is a set of very different and disparate markets, and trying to paint it with one brush will lead to a lot of frustration. And so I definitely appreciate that piece of ensuring that the organization is also zeroed in with not just a region, but indeed, specific countries that they prioritize, invest in, and you leading them through that kind of partnership and selection approach.
Yeah, we actually have a tool for that we use with our clients that allows us to build a weighted average score that is based on things like everybody would know, like ease of doing business and those types of things, combined with specific variables that are unique to the organizations that we're working with. And so that helps them reduce that subjectivity that goes into market selection and make more informed decisions. And that's something we put in the hands of our clients so they can truly think about what are the pros and cons of entering different markets and how those markets score against each other in terms of opportunity for each organization. So there are ways of doing that properly. There is no perfect science, but there are tools that can help sort of reduce that risk and that subjectivity and help organizations such as the one you're talking about think through those types of things and make those decisions in a way that makes sense.
Well, before we close, Francisco, I also have gotten to know you a bit, of course, here. And I love the fact that not only do you practice in this area of international expansion and being a global organization, but you are in and of yourself a very global citizen. And I'm just completely curious, how has the diversity of your background and even the various places in the world in which you've lived, how has that played into both the work that you do and an appreciation for, organizations who are trying to make these journeys?
It's huge. It's huge, Rory, as you know, because we've discussed it. Every time that you live in a new place, you're learning a new culture, you're learning many times a new language. And when I'm learning a new language, it comes with a variety of things. You have to change the way that you think. In fact, there are some studies that suggest that you have slightly different personalities when you speak a different language. And I don't know whether that's completely true or not, but definitely you bring a lot of that cultural context. You bring a lot of that new knowledge, way of thinking of the different places that you're in. So it plays a huge role because I think about problems from different perspectives. I don't necessarily approach it in a single way, but I also understand that there may be others that can tackle a problem better than I can. So that's critical, right? I surround myself with people who are also globally savvy, who come from different cultures, different backgrounds, men and women. Our team is very diverse. As we were talking about, it sits in different parts of the world. And we bring those perspectives into the work we do with our clients. And we have sort of created a culture of bringing everyone around solving those problems so that we can look at them from different angles. So it plays a huge role in what I do. It also plays a role in the fact that I do what I do because since I was a little kid, I was exposed to international traveling. My parents were always trying to expose us to new cultures and new places around the world. I was very lucky to have the opportunity to see a lot of things at very early age when I was very young. And I was always excited by, discovering all these new things, trying new food, trying new things. And it's influenced everything that I have done in my entire career. So I highly encourage everyone to travel as much as they can and try to walk the unbeaten path, right? So that you really understand how people do things in those countries you're going to. What the culture is like is huge, and it makes you a lot more adaptable in an understanding of why people think differently or act one way or another.
Well, I couldn't think of a better way for us to sum everything up today. And so, Francisco, thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to extend some of your wisdom to our audience. And I hope for those that are interested in learning more, where can they find you other than on LinkedIn, where, of course, this will be tagged for you?
Well, of course, on LinkedIn, and our website is www.factumglobal.com. That's the easiest way. There is a place there to do a free consultation. If they just click on the button, they can schedule a time, and a member of my team, or maybe even myself, will schedule something and have a conversation. But yes, I can also be found on LinkedIn, and my email, which is fgomez@factumglobal.com. But thank you, Rory. I really appreciate the invitation, and congratulations on the podcast. I've watched several episodes. It's really interesting, and I hope you keep doing it for a while.
Well, I appreciate it. And again, hopefully this was informative for individuals who made it to the end here and appreciate you watching. For those who have made it to this point, we look forward to another episode of the podcast in about 2 weeks. And in the meantime, be well.